lot different. The ADF is about 5 units higher on average, and you can see we've got a much wider range of 23 to 36%. Starch content, that's the big one. 31.5 versus 17.3. And look at the range, 5 all the way up to 31. So these guys virtually had no starch filling in those kernels. And the TDN, you know, relative to what we're seeing with you know, in quote high quality corn silage, it's down on average at 68, but you can see anywhere from 63 to 72.8. So I just put in a comparison with barley silage, again, over the last 2 years. 38% dry matter on average, not much difference in terms of the range. Again, so here's the difference between barley silage and corn silage that you have to overcome. Typically, it's going to be a 2 to 3 unit difference in crude protein. And again, you can see there's a very low value here, all the way up to 13.5, but typically you're going to be 11 to 12%. Not much difference in terms of ADF content between the two, not much difference in terms of the range. Starch content was almost identical to the corn silage, right? And again, there's some barley silage that's put up immature, and we don't get quite the high range that you would see with corn with barley silage. And when you look at the average of that, it's 65% TDN. Okay? So as a nutritionist, what do I take out of that, right? What I take out of that is I need to know what you're feeding in terms of the corn silage that you're putting up, because it's going to be variable. It's going to be variable from one producer to the next, and it's certainly going to be variable from one part of Saskatchewan to another. And to me, what this tells me from a producer's perspective is that you really need to know that you are getting a yield advantage and that you are getting a quality advantage relative to what you could be growing for barley silage. We can grow good corn, there's no doubt about that. When you look at the, you know, either the upper or lower ranges, whatever aspect we're looking at here, but there's going to be a lot of variability that's out there because of this variability that we've got in our environment. You know, we're just not, we might be there for some parts of Saskatchewan, but when you go to other parts of Saskatchewan, it is going to be a coin flip depending on the weather. Okay, and just to say that those samples aren't out of line, here is a study that Karen Boschman did, just published. So she's from Lethbridge, and they looked at 6 different hybrids grown in 3 locations in Alberta, Lethbridge, Lacombe, and Vauxhall, and 1 in Manitoba, Elm Creek, Manitoba. So Lethbridge, Lacombe, yeah, so Lacombe is, I think it's around a 2,000 heat unit area, and the other 3 are all about 2,400. They grew 6 different varieties there, and you can see the mean TDN content was even lower than the samples that I just showed you, 65% TDN. The mean starch was 24. Same kind of range, right? Same kind of range. ADF, even higher than what I have on my samples, right? And the protein, 8%, right? And again, their conclusions of words is that you have to be able to select the right variety that's going to mature the appropriate time in your area. Selecting a late maturing variety is really going to result in immature kernel filling, and that reduces these components of it. Okay, so back to my cow, right? So here's that 1,400 pound cow, second trimester, and I want to feed her, okay? So let's look at feeding her with corn silage. So what I used here was a hay-based ration for control, okay? So she's in second trimester, she's not cold stressed, she's not excessively pregnant, anything like that, so she's maintaining herself, right? So we could get by with that cow with 17 pounds of relatively good grass hay, nothing particular, 11 pounds of barley straw, and a mineral vitamin supplement, okay? I valued that hay at $120 a ton. You can pick a number this year, I guess, but that's what I valued it at. The straw at $55 a ton, and she's eating 28 pounds of feed, 24 pounds of dry matter, so right in that neighborhood of what I was talking about in terms of around 2% of her body weight. It's costing $1.25 to feed her, and the diet is 52.5% TDN and around 8% protein. So here's corn silage, okay? One example of corn silage, okay? So I could just feed that cow corn silage, and I wouldn't need a protein requirement at that stage. But I'd be feeding her just about all corn silage to do it, and she'd get fat because there's too much energy in it for her requirements. So I got to pull back, from a nutritionist perspective, I got to pull back the energy, okay? And I got to do that with straw. So I got 11 pounds of barley straw in there. Okay, the corn silage I've got in at $60 a ton on an as-fed basis. Okay, and that basically equates to $5 barley in terms of bushel. Okay, bushel price per bushel. So $31 for corn, or 31 pounds of corn silage, 11 pounds of straw, and if that's all I fed her, she'd be deficient in protein because of that lower protein content of the corn silage. So somehow I got to put some form of protein, and in this case it's canola meal. Canola meal is expensive, $300 a ton. Again, a little bit of mineral, and when you look at that, that's costing you 12 cents more per day under that scenario. So that is not an ideal situation, but that's what protein supplementation is going to cost you. It's going to cost you to put that in. But you could come up with other ways of doing it, just depending on what you have around you. And in this case, 28 pounds of corn silage, 13 pounds of pea straw. So if you look at the nutrient difference between barley straw and pea straw, barley straw is 4.5% protein, pea straw is 6.5% protein, and that difference can, at this stage of production, can get you to meeting her requirements, and that brings the cost back down in line with what we receive with daily. So now if we move to third trimester and we look at an increase in energy and an increase in protein requirements, really what we're doing is we have to come in basically across the board here, and we've got to supply more energy to meet those extra needs. That barley is also bringing in protein with it, so we're not really feeding any extra, maybe a touch more canola meal here, but basically barley at 10 cents a pound is going to cost you 30 cents a day to feed 3 pounds of it, and so your costs have now gone up, right? So we can meet the requirements of these animals. We can meet it basically with a wide variety of feedstuffs. We just need to be able to do it in an economical fashion. And if we're going to use corn silage, we just really need to understand what its nutrient value is. We need to have a feed test on it, and basically formulate a diet that's going to provide those requirements in a least cost manner. And here's just an example of a 650 pound steer that we might be backgrounding at 2.25 pounds a day gain. Just a comparison of corn silage versus barley silage. 25 pounds each per head per day. You'd have about 4.5 pounds of barley grain on the corn silage diet because of the higher energy in corn silage. So you've got more barley here, but you've got to come in with a protein supplement. In this case, wheat distillers is probably about as cheap as you could find in Western Canada, and at £1.75 in the corn silage diet, 3/4 pound in the barley silage diet, and when you kind of come through the program, at the end of the day, you're looking at $1.50 to $1.53 to feed that. And if you divide that by divide the $1.50 by 2.25, that's going to give you your feed cost per pound of meat. So again, whether it's corn silage or barley silage or alfalfa silage, you can put the rations together. It's just understanding what nutrients they're supplying and what other feeds you have to put with them to meet the requirements. So just to sum up, when we look at corn silage, you know, it certainly can be an excellent feed source for beef cattle. I'd love to feed it. Cattle love to eat it. Calves start on it very nicely. But corn silage in Western Canada, at least at the stage we're at, doesn't necessarily equal corn silage that we hear about in the US in terms of its nutrient makeup. It can meet it. You can certainly see situations where it's every bit the equal of it, but just because of the variation we've got in growing conditions, we don't see it. So the variability in growing conditions can lead to variability in yield and quality. So again, we've heard this, you need to select proper hybrid for your area. Harvesting that proper dry matter content is pretty critical. You know, you see some of these silages put up at greater than 70% moisture, and you just look at that pit and it just runs all winter. It just seeps all winter long, that moisture that's coming out of it. You're losing nutrients, you're losing dry matter, sugars. Relative to barley silage, it is higher in energy. There's no doubt it'll always average higher in energy. But we do see energy or variation in the energy content across the Western Canada in both of them, right? And a lot of that's going to be related to what we've talked about. So higher energy and lower protein supplementation in these rations is going to be required to some degree, just depending on the feed source you're feeding it with. So feed analysis, always want to be able to harp on that. If you don't know what you've got, you don't know what you're feeding. It's that simple. So thank you, and if there's any questions, I'll try to answer it.
I got a question for.
Yeah, go ahead, Travis.
You talked about kernel processors during the silage making process. So how do we know, like in this area, it's mostly custom guys that come in. How do we know that they have those set tight enough? Like, what should we be looking for in that?
Well, you should be looking at the kernel, and basically the kernel will be ripped apart. That's what you'll see. Yeah, if you're seeing whole kernels, that's not good.
So what difference would that have with energy available to cows then if they're eating it?
It's a little bit like processing barley, not to the same degree, right? So corn is not as, or the pericarp seed coat of corn is not as tough as what you see with wheat or the hull and barley. So if you had, just as an aside, you can feed whole shell corn to cattle and they digest it pretty good. But in this case, you'll see the same thing if you're feeding that silage and that it hasn't gone through a kernel processor. You'll see corn coming out in the middle. And when it's processed, it's you have very little of it. And actually, that's one of the research questions that they're thinking about at the university. You're processing corn silage. Should you really be processing barley silage? Should you have a processor when you're harvesting barley as well? Because you can see the difference. If you look at manure, and you're feeding a barley silage diet, you'll see grain come through them, both of them, and the color of them will be different. Right? The whole kernels that come from barley silage will be off color. They'll be a dark brown, almost a heated color to them from fermentation. Right? Whereas whole barley that's gone through cattle that you fed, you can clean it off and you eat it again. They can eat it again, right? Yeah. Yes?
When we feed corn silage ration to our backgrounding calves, is there a higher risk of bloat from using tundra alfalfa hay to boost the protein instead of peas or lentils or distillers grains or something?
Where the corn silage per se is not predisposing them to bloat. It's what else you're feeding them with that would predispose them, right? And certainly when you get into things like alfalfa, pea straw, lentil straw, And then in combination with particularly over-processed barley, that is usually a real killer from a bloat perspective. And certainly, you know, I think, you know, if you're using an ionophore, that is for bloat prevention is a good thing. It's something that can help minimize those types of issues.
I guess what I meant though, John, was tub ground alfalfa hay versus like whole peas or cracked peas or
Oh, I
cracked
see.
lentils. Not straw, but the pea or lentil grain is a protein supplement versus tub ground alfalfa hay is a protein supplement.
I think you'd have an increased risk of bloat with the tub ground alfalfa. Yeah. If you're just cracking your peas and not grinding them to a powder type of thing, if they're just cracked, they're an excellent, you know, cattle like them. They're high in energy, but they're also high in protein. Yeah.
So if you're gonna supplement protein with peas or lentils or a pulse like that, do they have to be cracked or can you feed them whole? I mean, to get efficiency out of it.
Efficiency, you need to crack them, yeah. And you probably don't need a protein supplement. I would doubt that you do, depending on how much peas you're feeding.
Yeah.
But if you're feeding 2 to 3 pounds of peas,
That would
I'd be surprised that you would need a protein supplement.
be the protein.
That would be the protein, yeah. Because, well, you know, I don't know what the price of your peas are, but,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah,
But they're usually more expensive than barley, right? So,
but much higher protein.
yeah, for sure.
So is there a difference in the varieties of peas and lentils? Will those all be on the Cow Bites program? I didn't look yet.
There would be an average value in there, yeah, for sure. But they're gonna be at least the value of barley, and they're probably gonna be 20% protein, somewhere in that neighborhood. Yeah, so.
Is there a quick method to check for moisture, like if you get a custom silage or in? And is there a way to tell if it's too wet before it gets there, like on the cob or the kernel, or?
Basically, the only real way to do it, you can, as Bart mentioned, milk line development, okay? The issue with that, so when you look at the milk line development, as that kernel fills, the milk line basically drops towards the core of the cob, and you know when the milk line has completely reached the core of that cob, it's completely mature and turns into the black line, right? And as you follow that milk line down, particularly in the denting varieties, as you get to half to 3/4, right in that neighborhood, probably 3/4, you're at 65% moisture, in theory. Okay? You're at 65%, which is where you want to cut it. Okay? But that doesn't always apply. And they've been finding out in Western Canada that sort of rule of thumb that comes out of the US doesn't always apply up here. And it doesn't always apply with denting varieties either. So the only real true way of knowing it is to sample stalks, chop them up, and do a microwave analysis on them or a moisture analysis on them. It's the only real way you can do it. Yeah.
You were saying when you feed pea straw or lentil straw, it's gonna increase your chance of bloat if you're feeding with silage and barley? Or did you not say that? That was when you were answering Dennis's question.
I've had experience with that, and for whatever reason, with pea straw, for a couple of reasons, I've seen cattle tend to sort it out.
Oh, out of the mix?
Yeah, leave it behind, but I've also seen issues of bloat on it. And in fact, we received calves at the university feedlot this fall, and they would have been fed a combination of barley silage, a receiving diet with barley in it, and pea straw. And I think we had 15% pea straw in there. And we had 3 bloats right off the bat. We knocked it down to 10%. We had another 2 bloats, and we pulled it out, and it stopped. So the manager at the feedlot now is very sensitive to pea straw. Yeah, so. But lots of people feed pea straw. You know, so.
Our custom silager for the last couple of years now has been really encouraging us to take the corn wetter than what we have been. He's talking like 70% or even a little over. His dairy customers north of the city, he says that's what they tell him they want. And people he's talked to in Alberta, and I don't know if that's other custom silagers or dairy producers are telling him the same thing. So if you're around 70 or a little higher, as long as you don't have liquid coming out of the pile, is that a problem? And depending, you know, if you have
Yeah.
decent pH.
Do you have a milk jug that you're watching every day? No. No, the dairy cow is a little different than the beef guy, or the beef cow. And dairy producers, what they worry about is when they put together rations, they're really, they want energy, but from their forage side of the ration, they want to provide fiber, and they want to provide digestible fiber, and taking that corn silage off at a higher level of moisture is going to give you it's going to give you reduced like NDF and ADF content in there, and it's going to give you, or not reduced, it's going to give you more digestible NDF content in there. So they're looking at it from a different perspective, but what's also dropped in there is your starch content, right? And you know, it's, so the energy value is going to be a lower energy value from your perspective. So I think, you know, in practicality, you're probably starting at 70% moisture. By the time you're done, you might even be on the other end of 65% moisture, right? But depending, I guess, on how long
Yeah,
the
they
guys
usually
take.
do it in a day, so
Yeah,
wouldn't
so
vary a whole lot.
it wouldn't vary a whole lot, but I think the closer you get it to that, you know, between 67 and 33%, or 63 and 67% moisture, I think that's the best place you should be at it. Yeah.
Any other questions for Dr. McKinnon? Not,
Yeah.
let's thank
Yeah,
you for.
thank you.